Ethan Carter, 29 years old, Senior Operations Analyst. Those were the words printed on the badge clipped to my jacket the afternoon my entire family stopped talking. Not because of my job. Not because of anything I said. Because a man wearing an expensive navy suit walked past every single member of my family, ignored the conversations that had been carefully arranged around my older brother, looked directly at me, and asked a question that nobody in that room ever imagined hearing. "Mr. Carter, we've been looking everywhere for you." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The music kept playing. Glasses continued clinking. My brother still wore the confident smile he'd practiced in the mirror before guests arrived. Then the smile disappeared. My mother slowly turned toward me. My father frowned as if he'd misheard. Even my grandmother, who had spent almost 30 years reminding everyone that my brother was the one destined for great things, lowered her coffee cup without taking another sip. The man extended his hand. "I apologize for interrupting the celebration, but our chairman would like to speak with you immediately." I remember hearing someone whisper behind me. "Him. Just one word. One quiet word." But it carried almost 3 decades of assumptions. The strange thing is, I wasn't surprised. Embarrassed. Yes. Uncomfortable. Absolutely. Surprised. Not really. Because when you've spent your whole life being underestimated, you eventually stop expecting people to see you clearly. You stop correcting them. You let them believe whatever version of you makes them comfortable. And then, one day, reality introduces itself. But this story doesn't start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. I grew up in a small brick house just outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing about our family looked unusual from the outside. Dad worked nearly 35 years as an electrical technician for the same manufacturing company. Mum taught 4th grade for almost 28 years. Our neighborhood had tree-lined streets, basketball hoops over cracked driveways, and the kind of neighbors who knew when your trash cans stayed outside longer than usual. We weren't rich. We weren't struggling. We were simply ordinary. Except for one thing. My brother, Daniel Carter, was 3 years older than me. From the moment he learned to walk, everyone described him using words that sounded larger than life. Confident. Natural leader. Gifted. Exceptional. Teachers remembered his name years after he graduated. Coaches told my parents they'd never seen a teenager with that combination of talent and discipline. At family gatherings, relatives would ask about Daniel before they even took off their coats. "How's our future CEO? Still getting straight A's? Any new scholarships?" Then, almost as an afterthought, "And Ethan's, how are you doing?" I don't think anyone intended to hurt me. That's the difficult part about these stories. People imagine favoritism as something loud. It usually isn't. Most of the time it's quiet. 1,000 tiny moments. 1,000 tiny comparisons. Enough to convince one child that achievement earns attention, while simply existing does not. Daniel loved attention. I loved solving problems. He enjoyed speaking in front of crowds. I preferred sitting quietly with notebooks full of ideas nobody asked to read. By the time I turned 12, I'd taught myself basic programming using an old desktop computer Dad rescued from work. It took 23 minutes just to boot. The monitor flickered. Half the keyboard letters had rubbed off. To me, it was perfect. While other kids spent summers riding bikes, I spent nearly 400 hours learning how databases worked. Nobody celebrated that. To be fair, nobody really understood it either. Dad would walk past my room. "You've been on that computer all day." "I'm building something." "You should spend more time outside." Daniel, meanwhile, would return home after winning another basketball tournament. Everyone gathered around. Photos. Congratulations. Pizza. Stories repeated for weeks. Again, nobody was trying to be cruel. They simply recognized visible success more easily than invisible progress. I still remember one afternoon when I was 9. It became one of those memories that quietly follows you through adulthood. Dad had bought 2 model airplane kits. One for Daniel. One for me. Daniel opened his box, glanced at the instruction booklet, shrugged, and started snapping pieces together without reading anything. Everyone laughed. That's confidence. I opened mine carefully. I spent almost 3 hours reading every instruction twice. Checking measurements, making tiny adjustments. When I finally finished, mine flew farther. Stayed balanced longer. Landed without breaking. Nobody noticed. Instead, everyone clapped because Daniel had finished first. That afternoon taught me something I didn't have words for until years later. People often celebrate speed before accuracy. Confidence before competence. Noise before consistency. Looking back, that tiny plastic airplane predicted much more than I realized. By high school, Daniel had become exactly who everyone expected. Student council president. Varsity basketball captain. Graduated with a 3.9 GPA. Accepted into one of the state's best business programs. His future seemed obvious. Mine looked forgettable. I wasn't popular. I wasn't athletic. I graduated with excellent grades but quietly. No award ceremony speeches. No newspaper articles. No standing ovations. Instead, I earned several technology certifications before finishing college, accepted internships nobody in my family had heard of, and spent nights studying supply chain analytics while classmates partied. When relatives asked what I was studying, the conversations usually ended after 30 seconds. So, computers. Sort of. Can you fix my printer? I smiled. Probably. That answer seemed easier than explaining predictive logistics algorithms. Daniel graduated into sales. He was charismatic. Clients loved him. Within 5 years, he had purchased a beautiful 4-bedroom home. Luxury SUV. Country club membership. Pictures from vacations filled every social media account. He looked successful. And to be fair, he was. I never resented that. What hurt wasn't Daniel's success. It was how everyone decided there could only be one successful son. If Daniel achieved something, it proved he was extraordinary. If I achieved something, it was usually dismissed as luck. Or timing. Or working with computers. I stopped announcing promotions. Nobody asked anyway. At 26, I accepted a position with a logistics technology company undergoing massive expansion. Starting salary: $87,000. 3 years later, $146,000. Performance bonuses averaging 22%. Company equity. Leadership responsibilities across multiple states. I never hid any of it. My family simply never asked enough questions to discover it. Whenever Mom called, conversations lasted about 12 minutes. 9 of those minutes focused on Daniel. Your brother's thinking about buying investment property. Daniel met another important executive. Daniel might get promoted. Then, how's work? It's going well. That's nice. Conversation over. At first I tried explaining. Eventually, I stopped. Because there comes a point where repeating your story to people who aren't listening feels less like communication and more like begging. And I refused to beg. So I let them keep believing I lived inside Daniel's shadow. The irony. Shadows only exist because something else is standing in the light. The older I became, the more I realized families rarely create a single story about you. They create a role. Once that role settles into everyone's mind, Every new piece of information gets forced to fit it. Daniel was the achiever. I was the quiet one. It didn't matter that the quiet one had built a career most of them couldn't describe. It didn't matter that my work affected distribution networks across 6 states and involved decisions worth tens of millions of dollars every quarter. In their minds, I was still the younger brother who sat in his room with an old computer. Roles are comfortable. Reality is complicated. My father, Richard Carter, was 62 when all of this happened. People who met him for the first time usually described him as dependable. They were right. He woke up at 5:15 every morning without an alarm. He folded every receipt before putting it into his wallet. He sharpened lawn mower blades himself because, in his words, if you can learn something once, you shouldn't have to pay someone forever. He believed in visible effort. Calloused hands. Long hours. Physical exhaustion. His own father had worked construction until arthritis forced him into retirement. To Dad, success was something people could see. If you came home covered in dust after a 10-hour shift, nobody questioned your work ethic. If you came home carrying only a laptop, well, how hard could that have been? He never said it directly. He didn't need to. His questions revealed everything. You've been sitting at a desk all day. Did you actually have meetings? What exactly do you do? I'd explain. He'd nod politely. Then ask again 3 months later, as though we'd never had the conversation. Not because he wasn't intelligent. Because my world didn't match the framework he'd spent 60 years building. Mom was different. Linda Carter had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. She remembered birthdays of former students 20 years after teaching them. She still mailed handwritten Christmas cards. She cried during commercials involving military reunions. Her weakness wasn't cruelty. It was peacekeeping. She hated conflict so much that she unknowingly rewarded whoever created the least discomfort. Daniel filled every room with confidence. Questioning him required energy. Correcting him risked arguments. I stayed quiet. So she unconsciously expected me to continue staying quiet. Not because she loved me less. Because she believed I would understand. That sentence, Ethan understands. I heard it my entire life. Daniel wanted the bigger bedroom. Ethan understands. Daniel needed help with a down payment. Ethan understands. Daniel couldn't make Thanksgiving because of work. Ethan understands. Nobody ever asked whether I did. Understanding became another word for sacrificing. Then there was Grandma Evelyn. She'd survived hardships I couldn't begin to imagine. Widowed at 48. Raised 2 children while working double shifts. She believed survival depended on strength. Her definition of strength, however, came from another era. Speak loudly. Take charge. Never admit uncertainty. Daniel reminded her of my grandfather. I reminded her of nobody she understood. She often smiled at me. She hugged me. She loved me. But every compliment came wrapped inside comparison. You're very smart. Pause. Just not as outgoing as Daniel. You're responsible. Pause. Your brother has more ambition. Even praise had conditions attached. Over time, those conditions become invisible chains. You stop trying to prove yourself. You simply become whoever everyone expects. Except, I never stopped growing. I just stopped announcing it. By the time I turned 28, my calendar looked completely different from anything my family imagined. I wasn't fixing printers. I wasn't writing random bits of code in a basement office. I managed operational strategy for one of the fastest-growing logistics technology companies in the Midwest. Our software optimized warehouse distribution, reduced transportation costs, predicted inventory shortages before they happened, The work wasn't glamorous. Nobody applauded when an algorithm reduced shipping delays by 11.8%. No newspaper printed my name because our forecasting model saved a client $12 million over 18 months. Success in my industry arrived quietly, usually inside spreadsheets, sometimes inside contracts, occasionally inside confidential meetings that couldn't even be discussed outside the office. I liked it that way. Recognition inside the company mattered more than attention outside it. My direct supervisor, Karen Mitchell, used to say something that stayed with me. The loudest person in the room isn't usually carrying the biggest responsibility. At first I thought she was simply encouraging quieter employees. Later, I understood she was describing leadership. Real leadership often looks boring. It's preparation, planning, preventing disasters nobody ever notices because they never happen. You don't receive applause for avoiding crises. You receive another assignment. I preferred that. Around the same time, Daniel's career accelerated too. He joined a rapidly expanding commercial real estate firm. Within 4 years, he'd become regional sales director. His income climbed quickly. So did his confidence. Again, there was nothing wrong with confidence. Until it quietly transformed into certainty. Certainty that his path represented success. Certainty that everyone else's path mattered less. Family dinners gradually turned into presentations about Daniel's life. He'd describe negotiations, luxury developments, networking events, private golf clubs, wine tastings with investors. Everyone listened. Then someone eventually looked toward me. "What have you been up to?" "Oh, work's been busy." "What kind of busy?" "The usual." Daniel would laugh. Ethan's always mysterious. People laughed with him. Not maliciously. Just comfortably. Because nobody realized mystery sometimes exists simply because nobody asks a second question. One Christmas, my uncle asked how much travel my job required. Before I answered, Daniel interrupted. "He mostly sits behind a computer." Everyone nodded. Conversation moved on. The funny part. That year I'd flown 27 times. Visited 9 states. Led implementation projects affecting more than 40 distribution facilities. Daniel genuinely didn't know. He wasn't lying. He simply assumed. And assumptions repeated often enough begin sounding exactly like facts. The distance between us wasn't created by one dramatic argument. It formed through hundreds of tiny moments like that. Small interruptions, quick conclusions, comfortable misunderstandings. Eventually they accumulated into an entire identity. Then came the engagement. Daniel proposed to his girlfriend, Rebecca. She was kind, intelligent, organized in ways that balanced Daniel's spontaneity. She worked as a pediatric physical therapist and somehow managed to remain patient even when surrounded by our family dynamics. She noticed things, little things. During one dinner she asked me what I actually did. Not politely, genuinely. 20 minutes later we were discussing predictive analytics, transportation modeling, and supply chain resilience. She followed every word. When we finished, she smiled. "I had no idea your work was that complex." I shrugged. "Most people don't ask." She looked around the table. For just a second. Long enough to understand something without saying it. After that, she occasionally tried including me in conversations. "What project are you leading now, Ethan?" Before I answered, someone usually redirected attention. Not intentionally. Just habit. Habits can be stronger than decisions. Months passed. Wedding planning consumed everyone's attention. Venues. Guest lists. Flowers. Budgets. Cake tastings. Color palettes. Every family phone call became another update. I was happy for them. Truly. Rebecca made Daniel better. She challenged him, softened some of his sharper edges. But pressure has a strange way of exposing beliefs people didn't realize they held. The closer the wedding came, the more often Daniel started talking about success. Not happiness. Not partnership. Success. Image. Status. Legacy. Words like that appeared in almost every conversation. At first, I ignored it. Then I started noticing who he said those words to. Mostly me. As though he needed me to agree that he had won a competition I never knew we were having. I still remember the evening. Everything quietly began moving toward the moment that would change all of our lives. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Nothing special. Grilled chicken. Roasted vegetables. My mother's homemade bread. The television muted in the background. Rain tapping gently against the kitchen windows. The kind of ordinary evening families forget. Until years later, when they realize it was the beginning of everything. Dad was carving the chicken with the same precision he'd used for as long as I could remember. Mom kept insisting everyone take another piece of bread. Grandma Evelyn was telling Rebecca a story she'd already told at least 6 times, only this version included a few extra details that somehow made it funnier. For a while everything felt easy. Normal. Then Daniel placed his phone face down on the table. It was a tiny gesture. But everyone noticed. He only did that when he wanted the room's full attention. I've got some news. Mom smiled immediately. I knew it. You knew what? I don't know, I just knew you were hiding something. Daniel laughed. Our firm finalized the Westbrook project. Dad looked impressed. The shopping complex. Daniel nodded proudly. $182 million. Dad let out a low whistle. That's incredible. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed his arm. I always said you'd do something big. Everyone congratulated him. And they should have. It was a significant achievement. Daniel had every reason to be proud. After the excitement settled, Dad looked toward me. What about you, Ethan? Anything new? Before I could answer, Daniel leaned back in his chair. I'm sure Ethan's got another spreadsheet. A few people chuckled. It wasn't a cruel laugh. Just an easy one. The kind families share without thinking. I smiled politely. We've been expanding. Oh, Mom asked. How much? We've opened 3 additional operational hubs this quarter. That's nice. She smiled warmly. Then immediately turned back toward Daniel. So when does construction start? That was it. Not because she didn't care. Because she understood Daniel's world. Buildings made sense. Warehouses managed by predictive software didn't. I wasn't offended anymore. Just familiar with the pattern. Rebecca noticed. I caught her looking at me for half a second. Not with pity. With curiosity. As though she couldn't understand why every conversation followed the same script. A week later she called me. It surprised me. We'd spoken before but never without Daniel. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. I need advice. What kind? My clinic is opening another location. Congratulations. Thank you, but we're struggling with scheduling and equipment planning. Daniel said you might know something about operational systems. That made me smile. Apparently, even Daniel recognized my expertise when it solved a problem. We talked for almost an hour. I helped her map patient flow, appointment forecasting, staffing ratios, and inventory tracking. Nothing extraordinary. Just practical improvements. At the end of the call, she laughed softly. I thought you'd give me software recommendations. You didn't need software. You needed a process. There was a pause. You know, she said carefully, you're very different from how your family describes you. I wasn't sure how to answer. So, how do they describe me? Another pause. They don't describe you negatively. I know. They just. She searched for the right words. They describe you like someone who's still figuring life out. I looked out my office window. Employees crossed the parking lot carrying laptops. A freight train moved slowly beyond the highway. I figured it out a while ago. I think you did. Neither of us mentioned it again. But that conversation stayed with me. Because sometimes it takes someone outside your family to notice the difference between who you are and who everyone remembers. Wedding preparations intensified over the next 3 months. There were planning dinners, venue visits, menu tastings, endless group messages. I attended everything I could. Mostly quietly. I never liked being the center of attention anyway. Then invitations went out. Almost 300 guests. Business executives, friends, extended family, former classmates, local officials. Daniel wanted everyone there. This is once in a lifetime, he kept saying. He wanted the wedding to feel important. Not extravagant. Important. There's a difference. About 6 weeks before the ceremony, Dad organized a family barbecue. Nothing formal. Just immediate family, a few close relatives and Rebecca's parents. The weather was perfect. 76 degrees. Blue sky. Kids running through sprinklers. Someone brought cornhole boards. Someone else forgot charcoal. Typical family chaos. I arrived a little late because I'd been on a video conference with our West Coast operations team. As I walked into the backyard, Daniel spotted me. There he is. He raised his drink. Our busiest man. Everyone laughed. I smiled. Sorry, meeting ran long. What kind of meeting? He asked it casually. Almost playfully. Quarterly planning. Sounds exciting. It was productive. Daniel grinned. I'll translate. He turned toward everyone. Ethan spent 2 hours looking at spreadsheets. Maury laughed. I chuckled too. Not because it was funny. Because correcting him would have required explaining things nobody really wanted explained. Rebecca quietly handed me a plate. Ignore him. I do. You shouldn't have to. It's easier. She studied me for a moment. Does it ever bother you? I answered honestly. Less than it used to. That wasn't entirely true. It bothered me differently. Not because I wanted applause. Because I wished people understood the difference between simplicity and invisibility. Those aren't the same thing. As the afternoon continued, conversations drifted naturally toward careers. One cousin had started a landscaping company. Another had become a nurse practitioner. An uncle had finally retired. Everyone shared stories. Then Aunt Melissa smiled at me. So, Ethan, when are you going to do something exciting like your brother? The question wasn't malicious. It was genuine. She believed I was waiting for my life to begin. Before I answered, Daniel laughed. Give him time. I have time, I said calmly. He smiled. I know, but eventually you've got to stop playing it safe. A few people nodded. That surprised me. Playing it safe. Over the previous 18 months, I'd overseen technology transitions, affecting nearly 1,100 employees. Negotiated contracts worth over $30 million. Presented strategic plans to corporate boards. Signed confidentiality agreements thicker than most novels. Safe wasn't the word I'd have chosen. But perception rarely asks reality for permission. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. Dad shifted slightly in his chair. Even Mom seemed uncertain. Daniel, however, kept talking. I just don't want you settling. I'm not settling. You know what I mean. I actually don't. He smiled again. The smile wasn't angry. It was patient. Like an older brother explaining something obvious. You've always been comfortable staying behind the scenes. I like solving problems. Exactly. He pointed lightly toward me. Nothing wrong with that. Then came the sentence. The one I would replay in my mind many times afterward. The world remembers people who lead, Ethan. He took a sip of his drink. Not the people hiding behind them. The backyard became strangely quiet. Nobody argued. Nobody agreed. The sentence simply floated there. Rebecca immediately looked down. Dad cleared his throat. Mom pretended to rearrange paper plates. I could have listed accomplishments, explained responsibilities, quoted numbers. Instead, I simply asked, "Do you really think that's what I do?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "I think you've always been happier living in someone else's shadow than stepping into your own." He said it gently, almost kindly, which somehow hurt more. Because he believed it. There wasn't any cruelty in his voice. Only certainty. And certainty is much harder to argue with than anger. I nodded once. "If that's what you see." He smiled. "I know you, little brother." No. He knew the version of me that had existed when I was 16. The quiet teenager who preferred books over basketball. The kid who never interrupted. The boy everyone assumed would always follow. He had never bothered to meet the man. I changed the subject. 5 minutes later, everyone else did too. The barbecue continued. Children laughed. Burgers came off the grill. Someone started talking about football. From the outside, nothing dramatic had happened. But inside me, something shifted. Not toward revenge. Toward acceptance. For the first time, I realized I didn't need my family to recognize me before I recognized myself. Some truths arrive quietly. Without applause. Without confrontation. Without anyone else even noticing. Looking back now, that afternoon wasn't the moment my brother humiliated me. That moment was still coming. The barbecue was simply the rehearsal. The real performance would happen 4 weeks later, surrounded by nearly 300 guests, beneath crystal chandeliers, with every member of our family watching. 4 weeks passed faster than I expected. Work became even busier. Our company was preparing for the largest operational transition in its history. 3 regional distribution networks were being merged into a single integrated system, affecting more than 70 warehouses and close to 4,000 employees. For almost 8 weeks, my calendar looked like a puzzle someone had given up trying to solve. Meetings began at 7:00 every morning. Conference calls stretched into evenings. There were nights when I reached my apartment after 10 o'clock, microwaved leftovers, answered another 20 emails, and fell asleep on the couch without turning on the television. I enjoyed every minute of it. Not because it was easy. Because it mattered. Every decision my team made reduced delays for hospitals, manufacturers, and food suppliers. When everything worked, nobody noticed. When it failed, entire supply chains slowed down. Responsibility has a strange way of making your own ego feel very small. The week before Daniel's wedding, Karen stopped by my office. She leaned against the doorway without saying anything for a moment. "You've been avoiding vacation." "I know. You've got 12 unused days." "I'll use them." "When?" I smiled. "After this project." She laughed. "You've said that every quarter since you started here." She wasn't wrong. Then her expression changed. More serious. "I heard you're taking Friday off." My brother's rehearsal dinner. And Saturday. The wedding. She nodded. Good. I wasn't planning on missing it. I know. She folded her arms. But I want you to leave your laptop here. I looked at her. She knew me too well. I'll only check emergencies. No. What if something happens? If something happens, we'll handle it. She paused. Ethan, you're allowed to be someone's brother for 2 days. Those words stayed with me. You're allowed to be someone's brother. Sometimes we become so identified with our work that we forget we exist outside of it. I locked my office Friday afternoon and drove to my parents' house. The rehearsal dinner was being held at a restored historic hotel downtown. Nothing extravagant. Just elegant. About 60 guests. Immediate family. Wedding party. Close friends. Business partners. The ballroom overlooked the river, and as the sun began setting, the windows reflected orange light across polished wooden floors. It was beautiful. Mom cried before appetizers even arrived. Dad spent 20 minutes adjusting his tie. Grandma Evelyn insisted everyone take at least 3 group photographs. Rebecca looked nervous but happy. Daniel looked exactly like someone whose life was unfolding according to plan. When he saw me, he smiled. There he is. He hugged me. I'm glad you made it. I said I would. I know. He stepped back. You clean up pretty well. I shower occasionally. He laughed. For a moment, everything felt normal. Maybe the conversation at the barbecue had simply been forgotten. Maybe I'd overthought it. People say careless things. Families move on. I hoped that was true. Dinner began. There were speeches from Rebecca's maid of honor. Stories from Daniel's best man. Laughter echoed around the room. Then Dad stood. He thanked everyone for coming. Talked about family. Talked about marriage. Talked about commitment. His voice cracked twice. Mom reached over and squeezed his hand. When he finished, everyone applauded. Daniel stood next. I want to thank everyone who's helped us get here. He spoke confidently. Naturally. The room listened. He thanked Rebecca. Her parents. His friends. His mentors. Then he started talking about family. My parents taught me what hard work looks like. He smiled toward them. My grandparents taught me resilience. Another smile. And my little brother. He looked directly at me. You taught me something too. People turned in my direction. I smiled politely. I learned that every family needs someone who reminds the rest of us that ambition matters. A few confused laughs. He continued before anyone processed the sentence. I always knew I had to keep pushing. He grinned. Because if I slowed down, Ethan would have been perfectly happy staying exactly where he was. The room laughed louder. Not everyone. But enough. I heard glasses clink. Someone near the back actually slapped the table. Daniel raised both hands. I'm kidding. Maury laughed. Then came the lines. The one that settled over the room like heavy fog. Ethan's proof that talent means nothing without drive. He looked at me with a smile. I love you, little brother. Another laugh. You'll always be my favorite underachiever. Silence. Not complete silence. The kind where people aren't sure whether they're still supposed to laugh. I felt almost 36 pairs of eyes turn toward me. Waiting. Expecting me to smile. To play along. To confirm it was harmless. Rebecca's smile disappeared instantly. Dad stared at his plate. Mom looked horrified. Grandma forced a weak chuckle that faded almost immediately. Daniel was still smiling, waiting for me to rescue the moment. I stood slowly. Lifted my glass. I love you too. I paused. I'm genuinely happy for you. Another pause. I hope tomorrow is everything you've both dreamed it would be. I raised my glass slightly higher. Congratulations. Then I sat down. That was all. No comeback. No sarcasm. No speech. Conversation resumed awkwardly. Within 5 minutes, people were discussing dessert. Music started again. From the outside, the evening recovered. Inside the room, something had changed. Rebecca found me about 20 minutes later on the balcony overlooking the river. I'm so sorry. You didn't say it. I should have stopped him. You couldn't have. He crossed a line. I looked out across the water. Lights reflected in long golden streaks. I don't think he even realized it. She sighed. That's what worries me. We stood quietly. Then she asked something unexpected.